Good afternoon and welcome to today's forum featuring Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, moderated by Tufts political science professor Jeff Berry. This event is presented as part of the Tisch College Distinguished Speaker Series. Tisch College has brought some outstanding guests to campus this semester, like Congressman Joaquin Castro, Republican strategist Ana Navarro, and just last week, former Secretary of State John Kerry. I am grateful to Tisch College for all they do to host these inspiring leaders who engage with the Tufts community on important issues, and for their work organizing today's event. I also want to thank the co-sponsors of today's forum, the Department of Political Science, and Jumbo Vote, Tufts student-led voter engagement initiative. And I want to acknowledge Medford Mayor Stephanie Burt for joining us today. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for being here and for your leadership in this host community, which we truly cherish. I also want to acknowledge special guest State Representative Paul Donato. Thank you for joining us and for your leadership in our communities. In a year when we had a consequential national election, we must not overlook the importance of local and state officials like Mayor Burke, Representative Donato, and Attorney General Healey, who work hard every day to serve their constituents, to strengthen our communities, and to safeguard our rights. It is my privilege to introduce tonight's honored guest, Attorney General Maura Healey. A New Hampshire native, she attended Harvard University, where she was co-captain of the basketball team. Following graduation, she then went on to play professional basketball in Europe for several years. After returning to the United States, she got her law degree from Northeastern University and clerked for a federal judge before a successful tenure at Wilmer, Cutling, Pickering, Hale, and Dorr, one of the top law firms in the country. Healey then began her public service career as Assistant District Attorney in Middlesex County. In 2007, she was hired by her predecessor, then Massachusetts Attorney General Martha Coakley, to head the office's Civil Rights Division. In that role, she led the state's challenge to the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, crafted anti-bullying legislation, and was part of the legal team that fought predatory subprime lending schemes which helped fuel the mortgage foreclosure crisis. Healey then went on to serve as Chief of the Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau and Chief of the Business and Labor Bureau. In 2014, she was elected as Attorney General of Massachusetts. During her time in office, she has emerged as a fierce advocate for all the citizens of the Commonwealth. One of her first initiatives as Attorney General was Game Change, an innovative approach to healthy relationship and violence prevention education. The program provides training and anti-violence strategies to students, faculty, and coaches at public high schools across Massachusetts. Under her leadership, the Attorney General's office is combating the opioid epidemic on multiple fronts. She has also shown a willingness to challenge the federal government, suing the Trump administration over the travel ban, family separation at the border, environmental protection, and other crucial issues. Healey brings with her a genuine energy to everything she does, and I hope that you are looking forward to this program as she shares her insights and experience as a statewide elected official. Joining Maura Healey in conversation is Jeff Berry, the John Skuse Professor of Political Science at Tufts University. Professor Berry is one of the nation's leading experts on policymaking in Washington, political interest groups, nonprofits, and urban government. He is the author of several award-winning books, most recently, The Outrage Industry, co-written with Tufts sociologist Professor Sarah Soberaj, which explores the role of political opinion media in our civic life. Professor Berry is also a sought-after political commentator himself, especially on Massachusetts politics. You can frequently find his insight on the pages of the Boston Globe and in other major state and national media outlets. We're fortunate to have one of Tufts University's most incisive political minds guiding this conversation. And now, please join me in welcoming Professor Jeff Berry and today's guest, Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey. Thank you.
We're going to start right away with questions. There have been enough introductions. So how this is going to work is the first half of the program, I'm going to ask the questions. And then the second half of the program, you'll ask the questions. We have mics. And so think of the questions that you want to ask the Attorney General. So since this is a university, this is academia, I want to ask you a deeply philosophical question, which is, you're a jock and you played sports professionally. So tell us what the relationship is between sports and politics.
Well, I will. And obviously I'm a point guard, which is why my feet don't touch the ground. And I just want to begin, Jeff, by thanking Tufts for having me here, the folks at Tisch College, Dean Solomon, President Monaco, all of the wonderful team here at Tufts. We're so lucky in Massachusetts to have the academic institutions that we have, and Tufts is certainly leading the way. So I really, really am so heartened to be on campus. I love being on campuses. It's like, this is where the energy is, this is where the innovation is, this is where the future is. Literally, you are the future, and I am just so happy to be here. Great to see your wonderful Medford Mayor, Mayor Burke here. We partner on a lot of things as well. And I want to send a shout out to the men's soccer team for their third national championship. It's excellent. And where are the women? Carla and her team. Carla Berube runs an outstanding program here, and I just want to give a shout out to the women of the women's basketball program who year after year are doing great things in the classroom and on the court, and I wish you guys all the best. I know you're undefeated, already underway. I look forward to being out and watching some games and watching all of you. And I guess that's a sort of a segue into the answer to your question, which is the role of sports in my life. Now, I was lucky. I played sports. I captained the team at Harvard, and I played a little bit of pro ball, though could never compete with the likes of Carla Berube, that's for sure. But I did learn a lot from sports, and I think that sports, to me, has taught me a few things. It taught me a lot about, I think, teamwork, most importantly, teamwork. And basketball, of course, is a team game. Everybody's got a role. Everybody's got an opportunity to contribute. And I think the ability to work together is something that becomes incredibly important in school and in life, and certainly in the workplace. And a lot of the work that I do in my office and then with other AGs really involves this concept of teamwork. The other thing is that it teaches you about discipline. When I ran as a really unlikely candidate for office 5 years ago, one of the things that I think really helped me is that I sort of treated that campaign like a season. You get up every day, you go to practice. It took the form of meeting people and hustling and working around the state. I had good days, I had bad days, just like we had good and bad practices. And ultimately, I think it was the experience that I had playing sports that really helped me compete and compete successfully. The other thing I think it teaches you is how to deal with loss, how to deal with adversity, the discipline that you learn, the resilience that you learn, and ultimately, you know, the realization that save but for a few people, and I know you had Kevin Love here recently, you can't just wake up and perform and compete. It is days and weeks and months and years that go into success, and I think that that is a recipe, a formula for success in life generally. So yes, sports are important to me. They've given me a lot, you know, and I'm lucky that I grew up in my little small town in New Hampshire where my mom, I remember, probably for the sake of her sanity, I'm the oldest of 5, found a way to make sure that all of us kids were occupied and sports became part of our lives. I must note, my dad, who graduated from Tufts with an engineering degree, came here from Newburyport High to play baseball. So there is a little bit of a sports connection to Tufts as well.
I'm going to, I don't have a good segue to the next question, so I'm just going to ask you about...
That's too bad, we're not going to talk sports all
No, I'd be happy to, but I want to ask you about the litigation strategy you've used for Big Pharma. And there's a lot of people that say, you know, why are you going after the makers of the drugs? Isn't the responsibility for the opioid crisis of the people who abuse them or the doctors that overprescribe them? Why is it that the manufacturer is responsible, at least in the eyes of the lawsuit that you filed?
You know, ultimately, I think the answer is that they are responsible for laying the groundwork for creating the circumstances of what has become the nation's most devastating public health crisis and epidemic that we have seen for a long, long time. And when I was running back in 2013, people started to approach me and say, hey, I got to talk to you about this problem. I've got a son, a daughter, a parent, a brother or sister addicted right now. At that time, many were addicted to prescribed opioids, prescribed pain medication. And this has continued to be a huge problem that has grown over the last 5 years, not just here, but across this country. And basically, you know, Jeff, what I've done as an office is to try to use the tools of the office, including litigation tools, to address the problem, to hold people accountable who need to be held accountable, to make sure that we're making victims and those affected by this whole, and to try to put in place measures to ensure this never happens again. So one of the things we started doing was to immediately go after doctors and prescribers who were prescribing illegal amounts of pain medication out there. We spent a lot of time reining in those practices. We then worked with the legislature and the governor to pass laws that changed the way pills were prescribed and dispensed. I worked right away to make Narcan available to all first responders in the state, setting up a fund out of my office to make sure that cost was never a barrier to keeping somebody alive. I've focused more recently on prevention and education. We pioneered out of my office a program called Project Here, where we've made substance use prevention education available to every public middle school in the state. Stopping addiction before it sets in is so important, and I think something that this crisis has really laid bare is the inability of our society, our country, to take note of substance use disorder and behavioral health and the way it plays out, and to have put in place what needs to be put in place going forward in terms of better systems and care for those issues. But on litigation, you're right, we've gone after the manufacturers and distributors. As I say, you know, as somebody who's studied this for a long time now, it was back in 1998 that Purdue Pharma and others went to Congress, lobbied Congress to change the rules. It's why we go to the doctor's office now and we're asked for where our pain is on a scale of 0 to 10. These things didn't exist before, and essentially put in place measures that incented the heavy prescribing of prescription opioids. And then over the next 15 years, as we saw more opioids prescribed, we saw more deaths, and we also have seen recently the turn towards heroin and fentanyl, and that is in fact what is killing so many people in Massachusetts right now. So our work continues. We're in court actively in litigation, and again, I'm just trying to drive something that brings accountability, that brings changes in practices, and that brings some monetary relief. There's no way to put a price on a life. I know that. But we have to do all we can to make sure that we are getting what we can for families who've been affected, communities. I can't tell you, and the mayor could tell you what the costs are to our first responders, what the expense has been to our hospital systems and emergency rooms, the lost GDP. Recently, the Massachusetts Taxpayers Forum put forward a report that showed the economic impact of this. Every day, little babies are born in this state, opioid addicted, and I can't tell you the number of grandparents I meet who are raising grandchildren as a result of the addiction and disease suffered through their families. So a lot of work to do, but fortunately we have tools as litigators under consumer protection statute and other laws that will allow us to address this issue, hopefully.
I want to turn to maybe a very unsexy issue in the criminal system, which is cash bail, which became an issue in this election in Massachusetts and more at the Middlesex County and Suffolk County level than at your level, but I know you're interested in it. So I wonder if you could first explain cash bail and what it does and why it is that there's a movement in Massachusetts to get rid of it. And Massachusetts is a little late to the game on this. So if you could start by explaining what it is.
All right. I assume not all are familiar with bail. I won't ask. But, you know, basically bail is this procedure that we have, the system that we have in place, that really is intended to ensure that if you are charged as a criminal defendant, that you show back up in court. That's the point of bail. That's the constitutional permissible use of bail. It's to ensure that a defendant returns to court, having been arraigned, to answer for the charges. Now, recently in Massachusetts, we passed a law that in some sense does catch up with other states, and in other senses does do a little bit more. But basically, the point of the cash bail reform aspect of the very important criminal justice reform law that was just passed here in the state is to say definitively that bail is for the purpose of ensuring that one returns to court, and that poor people shouldn't be kept in jail just because they can't afford to make bail. See, over time and around this country, we've seen instances where people simply can't afford to make the bail, to pay the bail of $200 or $300 or $400 or $500. And when they can't afford to pay, they then have to remain in jail until their trial date or until they can pay. And so, importantly, what the reform law does, Jeff, is it says one's inability to pay is not a basis to keep them in jail. And so the court's allowed to take that, and in fact must take that into account when setting bail. So I think that's an important measure. There's a lot else we need to do to make our criminal justice system fairer, to address some of the disparities, particularly racial disparities and socioeconomic disparities that exist around and throughout the system.
Yeah, one thing in my cities class we talk about is how things cascade and families disintegrate because of them. So for the want of $100, a man or woman loses his job, and then more thing, you lose your home, and eventually the family goes. So it's really something that's very crucial, and yet it's really unappealing because people think criminals belong in jail. And
I think that the conversation's changed importantly over the last number of years. I just came from a meeting with attorneys general from around the country, and in fact, today, many of us bipartisan are signing on in support of federal criminal justice reform legislation, and I think that just shows that more and more people are getting it in terms of the need for our criminal justice system to absolutely be there to punish those who need to be punished under the laws set through legislatures and society, but also there's an obligation there to rehabilitate. We, as members of a community, and certainly as taxpayers, want to ensure that people who do their time don't recidivate, right? And that, the point of some of this is to not only protect victims and hold those accountable who need to be held accountable, there's a deterrence function that absolutely needs to be met, but it's also to make sure that we're using resources effectively to address what needs to be addressed that led this person to do that particular act. And I think that's why you've seen far more receptivity and support here for programs like diversion that actually keep people out of the criminal justice system, programming for mental health, for substance use. So much violence is just induced and informed by trauma and violence visited upon that perpetrator earlier in their life. And so addressing these root causes is so critical to the functioning of a criminal justice system. And I do see that growing in terms of tremendous movement and momentum, and something we need to build on here. You're absolutely right. I met a young kid who, one of the things that we did in the criminal justice reform bill was to change the fact that one's driver's license was automatically suspended following a conviction for drug possession. And I remember meeting a young person who was about 23. He had been in jail on a marijuana possession and was out but didn't have his driver's license. And he couldn't get his driver's license because he didn't have the money for it, and he couldn't get to work, to the job he held before, because he didn't have a car to take him there. And also, Jeff, he couldn't take care of his grandmother, who needed to go to the doctors, or his little brother, who needed to be taken to school. So that serves no purpose, right? So that was an important reform and an example of the kinds of sensible changes we need to make within the criminal justice system.
Yeah, that was a wonderful answer, thanks. I want to give you a chance to inspire the students here. So when students come to me and my advisees and talking about their future, I'm very encouraging when they say they want to go to work for a nonprofit or for-profit or for government, but even though I'm a political scientist, I almost never say you ought to think about running for office. Maybe it's because they're at a tender age and they don't seem to have the thick skin that a politician needs. But tell these students why they should run for office like you or Mayor Burke. We need people to run, but it's such an ugly profession in many ways. It's tough. It's tough. I mean.
Well, you know, it's not for everyone, but everyone is part of it. And I guess that would be my point. You know, I mean, in this system of government, in our democracy, there are a few things that are really clear to me now more than ever. I really appreciate the work that Dean Solomon and the folks at Tisch and others have done to improve and enhance understanding about voting, about the franchise. It is so important that everybody here recognize their role in our democracy and take hold with firm conviction that they have agency in our democracy. And I think the best way that's manifested is through the ballot box. And I'm so heartened to see the impact of young voters, millennials. I know there are other terms as you slice and dice these different age categories, but my point is, like, you're the future and you are where the action's at. You're not only driving it in the ballot box, but if you look at the marches, right? Whether it's Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the impact of the Parkland students and what has taken hold with respect to gun violence, the energy around the environment. You know, when I go down to the climate march in DC, yeah, there's some old people, you know, but it's like young. That's where the energy is, and it's making an impact. I see that play out day to day in the decisions by legislatures, the pressure that is put upon members of Congress, and most recently we saw the results in this election where we had a really, I think, significant election when you look at the new faces going to Congress and what that represents, which to my mind, it represents a more representative democracy as seen through our elected officials. So you don't have to be the person running, all right? Because that's not for everybody, I totally get that. But you can be somebody who helps run a campaign, knocks doors, volunteers. All of this is so important. You can also, you know, think about the different kinds of offices. I believe deeply that for far too long in this country, people focus on the presidential race. They focus on these federal elections, which absolutely are important. But you know what's also important? Who sits on your school committee? You know, we don't have comprehensive sexual health education in our schools here in Massachusetts, though we pride ourselves on leading the way in both healthcare and education. School committees decide policy at the most basic level, fundamental impact. That's where you can have impact. So vote in every election, be involved in every election, and make sure that you're thinking about either running or supporting good people who can make good policy for the sake of our communities and our government here and all across this country. And honestly, the power is in your hands, as you see through the grassroots campaigns, right? That's not just magic, and it's not just personality. It happens because people are really working their tails off out there, talking to people, human to human, contact, making that happen. And nobody's going to do it better than young people who, by the way, aren't burdened or jaundiced yet by life. And, you know, and all I say to you is, don't let that happen. Fight every urge, resist every urge, you know, and try not to give way to cynicism. I am ever optimistic about the direction of this country and not always the direction, but the potential of the direction of this country. And obviously I'm dealing with, we see it every day, what's happening in the direction of this country. We're trying to just hold the line on some of it. But really, you know, you've got tremendous opportunity, and I think being involved politically is really important.
So the segue here is not being jaundiced, but the recent election that you just mentioned. So you've been a critic of the Democratic Party, your party, and has encouraged new faces, and you endorsed Ayanna Pressley over an incumbent congressman. And I'm wondering what's the problem with the Democratic Party, because the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi has been the biggest target, and of the top 6 Democrats in the House, there's one white male, and the others are minorities and women. So I'm wondering what exactly is the problem. Nancy Pelosi just led the party to a tremendous victory. So it seems like they're doing pretty well.
Yeah, no, and I'm a Pelosi supporter and always have been. But I do think that it's been very important that there be new voices, that there were new people running, that there are new faces taking new energy and ideas and representation to Congress. Ayanna Pressley will make a wonderful congresswoman. I happen to support her as she was somebody who supported me many years ago when I ran. And more importantly, we worked together on a lot of civil rights issues back when I was head of civil rights in the AG's office. And so I know her work, I know her substance, and I know what she will bring. But I think, it is important that we have both within the party those who have experience, but also those who are there with energy and ideas and again, are there to represent. The fact of the matter is the demographics of this country are changing. And for us to be a representative democracy, we need to have elected bodies that actually reflect the people so that they can be better informed when it comes to policy making. I leave a lot of the description of the party or characterization of party stuff to experts and to pundits. I really don't have a particularly strong view, except that except I will say two things. I think that there has been this hyper and heightened level of partisanship that is unfortunate, and I think a lot of people around this country are looking for people who can work in common purpose for a common good. I think there'll be increasing appetite for that. But I do think that as a Democrat, continuing to speak to issues that people care about, access to health care. How are they going to get their kids educated? What kind of job prospects are there going to be for their kids? Student debt, something I'm really passionate about and been working hard on. How are we going to deal with this issue? How are we going to deal with things like the opioid epidemic, aging parents, right? I mean, speak to issues that are of consequence to all of us around the kitchen table and keep the focus there. I think that's important as we go forward.
So I'm going to ask one more question of the Attorney General, and then we're going to open up for questions. So think about what you want to ask her, and we'll get to that. You and many other Attorney Generals sued the Trump administration on immigration and the separation of families at the border. But you talked about bipartisanship and the need for solutions. So litigation isn't a long-term solution to that problem. So is there a political solution on the horizon? Because I think President Trump is saying what his base wants him to say, which you and I don't agree with, but there is a lot of people that do not want us to reform on immigration. So is there a political solution? Is there something bipartisan that the two parties can agree on?
Well, I would hope so, Jeff. We'll see what this new Congress brings and the pressure that can be brought to bear for change. I don't see it on the immediate horizon, not with this president and not with this Senate, but in the meantime, I think it's important for us to continue to hold the line. Yes, we've sued the Trump administration a bunch. For me, I'll tell you what always is driving that. It's the answer to the question of what does that particular executive action or action by that federal agency mean for Massachusetts residents, our businesses, our economy. I think about the action that we took on the travel ban. I'll never forget the day I was flying back to Logan Airport that Saturday afternoon when the travel ban went into effect, and I asked my troopers to take me over immediately to the international terminal, and it was an amazing sight to see people who had left kids' basketball games and birthday parties that afternoon to volunteer their services to those who were literally stuck behind the gate or families who didn't know what was happening. Over the course of that weekend, not only were we busy preparing our papers to get into court, to get an order, which we did, stopping that ban, but we were busy working on affidavits, particularly affidavits from our major teaching hospitals that had star residents and others stuck or in limbo, our colleges and universities who had professors and students stuck overseas, our tech companies and our leading employers who are all adversely impacted by this decision. So a lot of that has been, I think a lot of the immigration-related work, whether it's our work there or on DACA or on the family separation policy, we've gone to court time and time again to hold the line on the Constitution, on civil rights, and fundamentally about standing up for American values. And I'll end with this story. I remember, for me, one of the hardest weeks in the office was the family separation policy week, and we were getting getting the papers ready to file. And one of my lawyers called me and said, come over to the conference room. I want you to meet someone. And I met this woman, Angelica. She's 30 years old, and she had fled a life of violence in Guatemala, crossed the border with her then 7-year-old daughter, was picked up by ICE agents. It was just before Mother's Day. One of the ICE agents asked her if they celebrated Mother's Day in Guatemala, and she said through a translator that they did. And he responded by saying, "Happy Mother's Day, and you may never see your daughter again." And that little girl was taken off to a facility in Texas. Angelica was sent here on criminal parole to relatives in Massachusetts. And she was with us preparing an affidavit for that court filing. And as I held her in my arms for about 2 minutes while she cried, all I could think to tell her was, that stuff's going down in Washington, but we're your government too. And that's what I want you to remember, we're your government too. And a few weeks later, I remember getting a call from her lawyer, and she, as a result of the court filings, she was waiting for her daughter, who was on a plane being flown to Massachusetts to be reunited. That was a little girl who turned 8 years old, by the way, cold and alone in that facility in Texas. And so I'm happy that we were able to take actions in court. We'll continue to use the courts as we need to stand up for the Constitution and to stand up for people here and across this country. And we've had a lot of wins over the last couple of years in our ability to hold the line against the DeVos administration or the EPA or others. And unfortunately, I think that work will continue. It needs to continue while we look to press to get the right people in office who can make policies that make sense and will move our country forward.
Thanks for that story. So when you... So if I could ask you, if when you ask a question, don't make a speech. So with that qualification, though, you can ask anything you want of the Attorney General. We have some microphones, so if you raise your hand, somebody will bring you a microphone. So down here.
Thank you.
It's on.
Good morning, Attorney General. My name is Carol Allen. I'm a pediatrician. I'm a Tufts Medical School graduate. And I'm glad you asked about immigration. I just have a follow-up question on that. The Trump administration is proposing to change the public charge determination. Could you comment on what impact that might have, and also what your office or the Office of Attorneys General around the country might be able to do to make sure that doesn't happen? Thanks.
Well, thank you for your question, Carol. We'll be prepared to sue, to file another lawsuit, to take this on. We've already been in touch with some of our other AG colleagues around the country who share the concern. Again, a decision like this is really in the wrong direction, economically, and certainly as a matter of fairness. And that hasn't stopped the Trump administration from doing any number of things. The fact that it's counter to science, fact, fairness, economic principles that are sound, which is why we got to be prepared to go to court. And I think that we're watching this carefully, but I think you've seen that we've been able to act pretty quickly because we've anticipated what might happen and have thought through the various legal claims. But it's another example of why, when they threatened to take away the ACA, when they threatened to take away Medicaid funding, especially in the midst of an opioid crisis, when people actually need access to Medicaid more than ever to get access to beds and care, it's why we sued to stop. It's why we successfully sued to stop them when they wanted to take away insurance coverage under the ACA for contraception for women. We were successful. And so we'll just be there to continue to try to hold the line.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking the time to come down to Tufts University. My name's Tim Leong. I'm in the undergraduate program at the School of Arts and Sciences. In recent years, President Trump has taken unprecedented acts in extending the authority of the office of the president. Could you comment on those acts and sort of speak to the role of the office of the Attorney General in checking the president? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tim. And I want to give a shout out too to all of the wonderful Tufts alumni who actually work in what we refer to affectionately as the People's Law Firm, your Attorney General's office. I have a lot of jumbos that work on our team, including Dave Cavell, who's here today. Jacqueline Varela also, worked for many years in the Attorney General's office. I'm delighted to see her as well. And we have a number of interns who work, including Cindy Mark, who's chief of our Fair Labor Division. We've always had a Tisch intern in our Fair Labor Division. So I just put that plug out there, whether you're in college now or you're in grad school later, think about interning in our office. We need all the talent we can get. Look, I think that you've seen the last couple of years the role of the importance of state AGs, who are there as the chief legal officers in their states, who are there to represent the people and the interests of their states. Now, the first time I sued the federal government and the president was not Donald Trump. This happens over time. There's this battle between the states and the federal government. I remember I was the lead counsel for the state when we filed and sued President Obama for the Defense of Marriage Act, which was the discriminatory law that banned recognition of marriages for same-sex couples, and we won. Years ago, Tom Riley as AG sued George Bush's EPA to get them to regulate greenhouse gases. So it's not like that hasn't happened before, but it has certainly never happened in the scale and the scope that it's happened. I remember saying at the Women's March that my message to Donald Trump was, if you make good on any number of your illegal, unconstitutional campaign promises, we'll see you in court. Now, even I didn't expect it to be so often or so soon. But, here we are. And if we don't do this, if we don't sue Betsy DeVos when she wants to let debt collectors and predatory loan servicers and predatory for-profit schools back into the education business, who will? If we're not there to stop the EPA as it seeks to subsidize coal at the expense of renewables, as it seeks to roll back important regulations that are there to protect our air and our water and soil, who will? If we don't sue to stop them from messing around with the census, which is fundamentally an effort to further disenfranchise whole swaths of the population, who will? So that's why you've seen so many lawsuits from state AGs, and fortunately, we've been really, really successful. I don't wish for or want for the opportunity to wake up and sue the President of the United States every day. I don't. I'd rather be doing other things. But if we don't do that now in this time, nobody else is going to be there with the legal standing to be able to do what we're able to do. So that work will continue, Tim.
Mike? Down here. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Nicholas. I'm a graduate student at the Fletcher School here at Tufts. Thank you very much for your remarks. I think it's something that's important that we haven't touched on yet is your personal role in representation and breaking the glass ceiling in terms of being the first openly LGBT Attorney General in the United States. And I'm personally really inspired by your work, particularly on human and civil rights. I was wondering if you could share some best practices from your experiences in building coalitions to move those forward and what it means to be a good ally, both in receiving that allyship and giving it to others.
Well, thanks, Nicholas. And I get that question, the glass ceiling. Sometimes I don't know what that's going to be about. It's like, is I a basketball player or what was the, But it's funny, when I ran, so yes, I got elected on the first openly, because who knows, right? I'm the first openly LGBT Attorney General in history. But, I have to say, running in Massachusetts, that actually wasn't of interest in my campaign. It wasn't talked about. In fact, the day after the election, there were papers from all around the world covering that fact. And my team kidded me about it because it really hadn't been the subject of discussion. The fact that I could spin a basketball was what was most intriguing to many people here. But one thing that I was struck by, Nicholas, is that when I was running, and certainly since, I've been so moved by people who've come to me and said, thank you for running, thank you for being in that position, because it makes me feel like I can do other things, I can be who I am. Parents who've said to me, thank you, it makes me see that, and it gives my young son or daughter confidence and inspiration. And to the extent that that serves a purpose, I'm happy to be in that position. I do think what you say about allies and partnerships is really the key. And we've seen that in Massachusetts. I remember when we filed the DOMA litigation, one of the things we did was to get all the businesses on board and all the colleges and universities on board to basically sign briefs in our litigation that spoke to the importance of workplace equality, of diversity on campus, what that meant for the bottom line and for better learning and development. We've come through a campaign season where here in Massachusetts, one of the things that was on the ballot was question 3, whether we were going to take away civil rights from transgender people here in the state. A few years ago, the legislature rightly passed a law that protected transgender individuals from discrimination in schools and places of public accommodation, in the workplace, and so forth. And there were some forces out there, ugly, that wanted to take that away. But you saw through ally and partnership a number of organizations, nonprofits, businesses, colleges and universities, our major professional sports teams all come together to take a stand for civil rights. It was something that we promoted a few years ago when my office got behind that legislation. We actually sparked a campaign called #EveryoneWelcome, and the whole idea was about coalition building in order to further support for the proposed legislation. And ultimately, we were successful. So I think that kind of work is really important. And part of this is just about acclimation and education. And I think the more that, I guess I want to say I give huge credit to those who've gone before, all of us who were willing to live out and open lives. And, you know, that's a hard thing to do. But I think that that is really important. I spend a lot of time in public middle schools right now and in high schools where there are gay-straight alliances. That's something that never existed when I was growing up. I think that's really positive. And I think fundamentally, you know, it's about whether it's with respect to sexual orientation or gender identity or race, religion, ethnicity, it's basically, you know, like the golden rule and learning to see the world through the eyes of another, through the lens of another, and realizing there's way more commonality out there and shared experience than there are things that divide us or that some would use to divide us. So, and look, we'll continue to be in court. We went to court to stop President Trump when he wanted to take away the right of brave transgender Americans from serving in the military. We won. We'll continue to fight those fights. But I think as a matter of policy and community, there's continued work and opportunity for all of us.
Hi, I'm Madeline Orzeski. I'm a senior at Tufts University. My question is about the Mueller investigation. So I want to know your opinion on the constitutional limits of Robert Mueller in the investigation. More broadly speaking, what is the role of the judiciary in this investigation?
Well, you know, and this relates a little bit to Tim's question. We have a president right now who thinks he's above the law, who thinks he can operate outside of the law. And everyone in this country is subject to the law. And that's why it is so important that the Mueller investigation be able to go forward. 2 weeks ago, I led an effort joined by other AGs calling for the recusal and ultimately removal of Matthew Whitaker as acting U.S. Attorney General. He has no business being there as a legal matter because the Constitution says that people who are acting Attorney General need to be vetted by and confirmed by the Senate. There's also actually federal law that says who's supposed to take over in terms of succession when the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, leaves. And finally, as an ethical matter, and I speak as a prosecutor now, you cannot be somebody who said all these ugly, disparaging things about, you know, explicitly saying that the Mueller investigation must be shut down and then be in charge of the investigation. I'm no Jeff Sessions fan, but even Jeff Sessions, with the appearance of conflict, had the good sense to recuse himself. So I think we got to be really strong about this. We're certainly prepared to as a legal matter, but I think a lot of continued pressure needs to be brought on Congress to make sure that the right steps are taken to protect the Mueller investigation. Because fundamentally, this is about our democracy. This is about the integrity of our democracy. And certainly as a matter of process, something like the Mueller investigation needs to be able to continue unimpeded, and it doesn't get more fundamental than that. So I do think ultimately, though, public pressure is what is going to really do this. I'm glad the House now has been taken over by another party, and that there'll rightly be looks by committee leadership into any number of activities, but I think it's public pressure that needs to be brought to bear so that the right actions be taken in the face of what we may see from this president, who really knows no bounds and will stop at nothing to save himself and his family. And as you've seen things tighten over the last few weeks and certainly days, it is very concerning to me when you think about what he might do and how he might handle a situation.
Mike for down here.
Hi. Can you talk about gerrymandering and voter suppression? And are these problems that are primarily legislative problems or legal problems?
Well, they're both, gerrymandering and voter suppression. So we've seen some incredible examples of this, right? The fellow who ran and is now the governor-elect in Georgia was then the Secretary of State. What did he do? He shut down 200 polling places in Georgia. How did that work out for him? You've seen blatant efforts by state legislatures to rewrite the districts to further suppress the vote and make sure that those who may be more statistically inclined to vote for one party don't have access, whether it's closing down polls, changing the polling locations. There's a guy who's just up for the federal bench in North Carolina who was back in the day Jesse Helms's right-hand person, and remember they sent out that really misleading and racist literature during the Helms campaign that was meant to intimidate voters and intimidate African American voters in particular. So look, there are so many examples of this. I think it needs to be fought legally, certainly. We've been in some of those battles with varying degrees of success around the country. That work needs to continue as a matter of civil rights law. But I do think this is a political problem. And ultimately, it's about getting the right people in place all across this country to make sure that we're not allowing that to continue. One of the concerns I had, I referenced this earlier, the fact that the Democratic Party, in my view, and I'm no political expert, but did not pay enough attention to state legislatures over the last 20 years is too bad. Because with all the focus on presidential and Congress, think about what was happening within state legislatures who are there writing and involved in the drawing up of some of these districts. Same with secretaries of state and AGs in some states. So I do think it is both a legal issue and a political issue. And, you know, again, it's so fundamental to democracy. And we have seen amazing, terribly amazing examples of efforts to suppress the vote in certainly the last few elections. And we need to get a handle on that. Again, young people, I think, are the way. That's one thing that is really exciting to me and that will help beat that back, essentially, in my view, is getting more people registered and getting more people voting in the face of these really strong efforts to suppress the vote.
We have time for one more question. We have a mic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hi. Oh, sorry. My name is Alexandra. I'm a senior at Tufts. I really appreciated and identified with your story about the time during the border crisis. I was working in Congresswoman Catherine Clark's office this summer when that hit, and I think that was definitely our hardest time in the office as well. And one of the things that I found was really hard about that was when constituents would call us and kind of be a little outraged that Congress couldn't do more to stop the family separations because of that partisan gridlock we talked about and not being able to actually get any legislation passed to do anything about it. So I know you mentioned a few actions your office took to fight against this, but I was wondering if you could speak more to just in general some of the actions that lawmakers can take to fight back against the policies that we can't actually change legislatively at this point, and I guess actions that everyday Americans can take against those atrocities as well.
Yeah, well, I think, look, there there are a lot of actions. There's certainly legal actions that you can take, but I think speaking up in your town, in your community, or on your campus, that means something, you know, and it can result in change. I use an example. It's not immigration, but it's guns. And I'll use, you know, guns as an example and what's happened the last couple of years. I remember in 2015, I enforced the state assault weapons ban. It was just following the terrible shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and I asked the question of my team, could that assault rifle be purchased here in Massachusetts? The answer I got back is that legally they weren't for sale, but in fact 10,000 of those AR-15s had been sold in Massachusetts that year alone, which led me to be clear that we were going to enforce the law that was on the books. That's 2015. Now, I took an incredible amount of criticism from some on that issue, and so I've watched this as an issue over the last 3 years. And yes, we've been in court, and yes, we've been successful defending our strong gun laws, which is important because strong gun laws, in my view, save lives. But we've also seen the rise in organizations. I think about the role of students speaking up and the impact that that has had, whether it was the walkouts or other ways of organizing, going to supermarkets, going to stores, commercial outlets, and leading protests. I think about the impact that that has had, where you've seen companies like Dick's Sporting Goods take steps to not sell certain weapons. I think about what some banks and investment funds are doing now as a result of public pressure on them to be clear that they're not going to finance the production of military-style weapons for civilians. And to me, like, that is an example of what can happen within a movement that so far hasn't meant legislation, that didn't involve litigation, it involved advocacy and activism. And I think that particularly on college campuses, and as you go forward, look for those opportunities, because I think that ultimately that has tremendous power, and you'll see that, you know, as you go forward. And thank you for working in Congresswoman Clark's office. She's terrific. Also, someone who led the sit-in on the House floor earlier this year when it came to the gun reform issue. And I think it's great that you spent the time. Listen. My last plug to you is we need good people in government. We, in fact, need great people in government. And I think government is a great place where you're not going to make a lot of money, but you're going to have tremendous satisfaction and certainly an opportunity to impact people and their lives in tangible, real ways, day in and day out. Not every day is a success. Not every day you're going to hit it out of the park. But every day you will have an opportunity to be in a position to make a difference. And right now in this country, we need people like you who will leave Tufts University and its wonderful graduate programs with the skills and the expertise, the education, the enlightenment, the teamwork, and the spirit of getting things done, wanting to get things done. And so I encourage you to consider joining us in government. And whatever you do, I know you'll find ways to give to your communities and make not only this state, but this country a better place.
Well, that was very inspiring. And we do have some great people in government, and you're one of them. We want to show our appreciation to you, and one way is that you get to pose for a picture with the awesome women's basketball team here right afterwards. So
nice. Nice.
That's going to take place right after this.
Okay.
We also, Tisch College has a personal shopper for gifts. His name is Alan. And he was on Newberry Street, and he got you some gifts. So I want you to open these here.
That's just that the whole way, that's just going to get me in big trouble, Jeff. Thank you very much. The whole, hey, look at this. All right. I have my... I didn't know they sold these on Newbury Street. Did you clear that with your lawyer? She's sitting next to you. She's right here. Scarf, very nice. Thank you very much. And nice lid. All right. Tufts basketball. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And as I said, my dad was a jumbo, so it's great to be among all of you, and I wish you all the best and happy holidays to all of you and to your families.